America today is at its wealthiest point than in its entire history. And in fact, many would argue that today the United States represents one of the richest societies in global history.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're about to argue that this is a bad thing, right? I mean, no one in their right mind would want to live in a wealthy country as opposed to a poor country.
Except among all these record profits, 40 million Americans are living in poverty.
The pertinent question would be, poverty compared to what? The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development defines the poverty rate as the ratio of the number of people in a given age group whose income falls below the poverty line, taken as half the median household income of the total population. In the case of the United States, the median household income across the entire country and all age groups is $61,937 per year. So that means that if you live in the United States and make $30,000 a year, or $2,500 per month, you are living below the poverty line according to the OECD. $30,000 a year might not seem like the greatest salary in the world, but since the worldwide median household income is only $10,000 per year, I'd hardly call such a salary living in poverty. Not to mention that 40 million people is only about 12% of the population, and the OECD excludes income from government programs and private charities that people do in fact take advantage of, such as Medicaid, food stamps, and WIC.
And 18.5 million Americans are living in extreme poverty, which is measured as less than $2 a day.
Well, the US population is 329,064,917 people. So even if that's true, that's only 6% of the population. However, I'm curious where AOC is getting her data, since according to the World Bank, only 2% of the US population is living on less than $5.50 a day. But even so, let's just assume AOC is right, and 6% of Americans are living on less than $2 per day. How exactly did these people get into this situation? As economist Walter Williams notes, there are only a few things that one need do to avoid living in poverty. Finish high school, get a job, and by that I mean any job, wait until you're married to have children, and stay out of jail. It is unfortunate that there is any number of people living in America on less than $2 a day, but can anyone truly say that such people are in such a situation due to absolutely no faults of their own?
That's why I'm so excited to introduce a suite of legislation, including 5 bills and 1 resolution that begins to chip away at our issues of economic injustice, and we're calling it a just society.
This is a classic trick of politicians. The Patriot Act, the Violence Against Women Act, the Just Society. Who could possibly be against bills and government programs with titles like these? Everyone agrees that justice is a good thing, but the devil's in the details. What exactly does the Just Society set out to do, and how does AOC define economic injustice?
A just society is a place where everyone has a place to sleep, food to eat, and access to education.
And last I checked, that would be virtually every person in America. Rent subsidies, utility assistance, homeless shelters, food stamps, WIC, Medicaid, public schools. What city in America lacks these things? Again, the OECD admits that it specifically excludes these programs when measuring poverty rates. If there is anyone living in America without a place to sleep at night, food to eat, and at least a high school education, they have no one to blame but themselves.
A just society to me would be better housing, better job opportunities, freedom to transform.
Nice tattoos, dude, but that's a pretty vague assessment. Things could always be better in theory, but the poorest 20% of Americans are already richer than people in most affluent countries, including European countries. Everyone wants to be doing better than they are now, But how exactly will government make things better? By how much? And more importantly, at whose expense?
Entonces, creo que si hay una sociedad justa debería ser para todo igual.
Una sociedad justa sería respeto a la misma raza.
There it is. These non-English speaking gentlemen just made clear that they are not interested in equality of opportunity. They're interested in equality of outcome. I know where this is going.
Our first bill is called the Recognizing Poverty Act, which seeks to update the national poverty guidelines in order for us to acknowledge modern life, which includes geographic cost of living, the price of health insurance, childcare, and new necessities like internet access.
Apart from government intervention, all those things would have their prices determined by supply and demand, and then driven down by competition in the market. Whatever your bill sets out to do, I guarantee that it will only interfere with this process and leave even more people without them. But for crying out loud, every public library has internet access, and any unemployment office in the country will be able to get access for those that are looking for jobs, or using the internet for any other legitimate professional reason. So don't claim that internet access is a necessity that people can't live without.
A just society recognizes and eradicates poverty.
Then, seeing as the poorest 20% of Americans are consuming more goods and services than the average person in at least 23 European countries, I'd say the US is already a pretty just society.
My story begins in 2017 when our landlords sold their property to new business developers, and then they in turn came in with the $300 pay increase. People that are supportive of this cause, you stand no chance in the eviction court system. What is going on with these greedy landlords is very unjust.
The idea that price increases are simply the result of greed is complete nonsense to anyone who understands basic economics. To be sure, a landlord may set whatever price for a rental property he wishes, but that price will only become a reality if there are other people willing to pay it. If rental prices go up in a given region, that can only mean that there are more people seeking housing than there is housing available. The only way to rectify this is to increase the housing supply, but the thing that usually stands in the way of that is the very government regulations that AOC wants to enforce.
A just society is one where there is decent and fair housing, and that it is looked at as a human right.
Are you kidding me? Housing is not a human right, nor can it be. Why? Because it takes time, labor, and resources to create. If you say that housing is a human right, you are effectively saying that other people have an obligation to use their time and resources to build a house for you, effectively making those people your slaves.
Our second piece of legislation is called the Place to Prosper Act, which creates a national access to counsel fund for all renters in America who are currently facing eviction. It also imposes a national cap of 3% on annual rent increases and begins to pursue penalties on abusive and predatory landlords so that they don't hurt any other family again.
As with any price control, all that rent control does is prevent the price mechanism from signaling to developers where the most demand for housing actually is. This ensures that instead of new housing being built where people want it the most, more and more people will end up fighting over the same scarce supply of increasingly crappy housing. It's no surprise then that more than a dozen peer-reviewed studies going all the way back to 1946 confirm that homelessness actually increases when rent control is instituted.
A just society treats housing as a right, not a privilege.
As Thomas Sowell has so eloquently pointed out, even if the government declared beachfront property to be a basic right of all members of society, that would not change the underlying scarcity in the slightest.
It's been really hard for me to find housing I have the money to move places and stuff, but they deny me for my felony history. It's not right, you know. So no matter what, every place I go to, they try to force me to a certain area in town.
What? No. It can't be that people actually consider your past behavior when evaluating whether or not they want to do business with you. Can it?
A just society is merciful. The Mercy and Re-Entry Act ends federal discrimination of extending public benefits to people who were formally convicted of a crime and duly paid their debt to society. We know that poverty is one of the leading causes of recidivism, and the only way that we can successfully reintegrate people into society is by making sure that the social safety net can apply to them too.
The best way that formerly convicted criminals can reintegrate into society is to develop patterns of behavior that demonstrate to employers and landlords that they've changed their ways. However, thanks to minimum wage laws and other regulations that raise the cost of doing business, hiring ex-cons carries with it a significant risk for business owners. If you really want to help ex-cons find employment and places to live, the best thing to do would be to remove government regulations and allow these people to work out their own deals with business owners and landlords so that they can demonstrate a pattern of behavior that shows they've changed their ways and now deserve the same pay and living spaces as others who do not carry the same risk. Policies designed to force landlords and business owners to hire or extend housing to ex-cons is likely to do the same thing that any such regulations do: lead to less jobs and less housing overall.
Queremos una sociedad más justa para todos. Todo aquel que tenga documento o no tenga documento. En mi caso tengo un espacio muy pequeño y estoy buscando un espacio más grande, pero mi income es muy bajo, muy por debajo de la pobreza.
The Embrace Act also ends this type of federal public benefits discrimination based on one's immigration status. A just society embraces our immigrants.
I'm a libertarian, so I do support open immigration in principle. However, when you extend public benefits to illegal immigrants, do you think you're going to get more or less immigration? What would happen to a retail store that put a sign in the front window that said, "Everything's free, come and take it"? If there were no public benefits, immigration would be limited to those that were prepared to obtain jobs and contribute to society. But with open immigration and public benefits, immigrants flooding across the border will bankrupt the system before long. One only need look at what's happening in the state of California to see proof of this.
What a just society looks like to me is safe, healthy, affordable housing, food for everyone, money to take care of our families, and a good education for our children.
Then by that standard, America sounds like a pretty darn just society to me, even under current government policies. Would you rather live in a socialist paradise like Venezuela? If you want those things to be cheaper and better quality, try removing government regulations that prevent competition in the market.
A just society affirms workers' rights. That's why in our Uplift Our Workers Act, we've decided to create a worker-friendly score similar to LEED certification for all federal contractors. We then direct the federal government to prefer doing business with worker-friendly contractors, and this includes considerations like worker cooperatives, union memberships, and pro-worker policies like paid family leave, a living wage, healthcare, and more.
So you're going to let a government bureaucracy decide which businesses can and can't stay in business? You do realize that this will limit the amount of places that workers can obtain work, regardless of how they're treated and what benefits they're receiving. Remember, when you tell workers that they deserve more than whatever they've voluntarily accepted from their employers, you're really telling them that they'd actually be better off having no job at all, since increased minimum wage and other policies that increase the cost of doing business can only put businesses under, not create new businesses.
Para mí, una sociedad justa es tener salario justo.
Fair according to whom? You mean like, I don't know, engaging in a voluntary contract between employer and employee?
Tener clima, aire, medio ambiente saludable.
Then for goodness sake, embrace free markets. The correlation between environmental score and economic freedom is unmistakable.
Finally, a just society is a participatory member in our global community. That's why our final piece of legislation is a resolution that directs the Senate to finally ratify the UN Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Already, 170 international parties have signed on to the Covenant, which guarantees a modern set of human rights that includes housing, healthcare, and education, as well as the right to form a trade union and modern-day dignified work conditions. In a modern, moral, and wealthy society, no person should be too poor to live. That's what a just society means to me, and I can't wait to hear what a just society means to you.
Alright, Miss Ocasio, let me give you a quick lesson about what a right actually is. Rights exist in a negative context. In other words, they don't guarantee you any positive good. Rather, they restrict what other people can do to you, and preserve those things that you have by the nature of your own existence. Your life and the fruits of your own labor. If you have a right to life, that means that no one else may deprive you of it, but at the same time, no one is obligated to feed you or clothe you. If you have a right to free speech, that means that no one else may use force to shut you up, but at the same time, no one has an obligation to listen. One cannot, in principle, have a right to housing, education, healthcare, or any other good or service. Why? Because these things are not inherent to your own existence. It takes scarce time, labor, and resources to create these things, and no matter what you do, there will never be enough to satisfy every person's desires entirely. If everyone has a right to healthcare, what you're really saying is that doctors have an obligation to provide it while receiving no compensation in return. If everyone has a right to housing, then engineers and construction professionals have an obligation to provide it while receiving no compensation in return. If you have a right to education, then teachers have an obligation to provide it while receiving no compensation in return. Do you know what such an arrangement is called, Miss Ocasio? Slavery. You want to use force to take other people's time and resources and give it to people who did not earn it. And the reality is that since you can't create goods and services out of thin air, this only guarantees a misallocation of resources and an overall increase in unmet needs and desires overall. The society that you advocate for is anything but just. And that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth. Thanks everyone for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, as well as hit the bell to receive notifications so that you never miss an upload. And if you're a fan of my channel, please consider supporting me on Subscribestar, Bitbacker, or Patreon to receive special rewards. All links can be found in the About section of my website, my2centsvideos.com.